The night my son asked me to move into a nursing home, he couldn't look me in the eye. I remember staring at the papers in front of me while my daughter-in-law smiled too politely from across the dinner table. "It's for your safety, Mom," Michael said, his voice trembling just enough for a mother to notice. But mothers notice everything. Beneath the nursing home forms, I caught a glimpse of another document, one with my home address printed at the top, the same house my late husband Robert built with his own hands. At that moment, my heart broke. Not because I was getting old, but because I realized my own son had been planning something without me, and he had no idea I still had one move left. If this story touches your heart, please like this video so more people can find it. Subscribe and stay with me until the end. You may see a piece of your own family in mine. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Most importantly, have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? I'm reading every comment. I drove home that night with the nursing home papers resting on the passenger seat beside me. Not once during the 15-minute drive through Charleston did I turn on the radio. The silence felt louder than any music could have. At 68 years old, I had learned that heartbreak doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people whose baby pictures still sit in your living room. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was still glowing softly against the South Carolina evening. I had left it on before dinner, never imagining that when I returned, my entire world would feel different. I sat in my car for several minutes, just staring. The house looked exactly as it always had. White shutters, blue hydrangeas near the walkway, the old oak tree Robert planted when Michael was born. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I finally stepped out of the car and climbed the porch steps slowly. My hands trembled as I unlocked the front door. The familiar scent of cedarwood and lavender greeted me. Home. Or at least what I had always believed was home. I placed the nursing home papers on the kitchen table, but couldn't bring myself to look at them again. Instead, I wandered into the living room. Robert's photograph still stood on the fireplace mantel. Even after 11 years, I still said good morning to him every day. That night, I whispered something different. "Well, Robert," I said softly, my voice cracking. "Looks like our boy thinks I'm ready to leave," the house answered with silence. But somehow, in that silence, I felt closer to my husband than I had in months. Robert Albright had built this house with his own hands. 42 years earlier, when we were young and foolish and in love, we had purchased this small piece of land outside Charleston. Back then, we had almost nothing. Robert worked long hours as an engineer, and I taught second grade at the local elementary school. Money was tight. There were months we survived on canned soup and faith. I still remembered the summer evenings when Robert came home from work covered in sawdust. He built the porch himself, the bookshelves, the kitchen cabinets, even the swing hanging under the oak tree in the backyard. "This house isn't made of wood," he used to tell me. "It's made of memories." At the time, I thought it sounded romantic. Now I realized how true it really was. I slowly walked through each room. The hallway where Michael had taken his first steps, the dining room where we celebrated every Thanksgiving, the staircase where our son once slid down on a cardboard box and broke his arm at age 9. I smiled despite myself. Michael had been such a sweet child, kind, curious, always bringing home injured birds or stray kittens. What had happened to that little boy? Where had he gone? Or perhaps the more painful question was this: had I failed somewhere along the way? I entered Michael's old bedroom. The room had become a guest room years ago, but sometimes I still saw traces of him there. The baseball trophies, the faded photographs, the framed acceptance letter from the University of South Carolina. My chest tightened. Robert and I had sacrificed so much for that education. I remembered taking extra tutoring jobs after school. Robert had worked weekends for nearly 3 years. We never complained. Parents rarely do. When Michael graduated, we were proud beyond words. When he married Jennifer, I welcomed her with open arms. And when they struggled to buy their first home, Robert and I quietly gave them part of our retirement savings. "Family helps family," Robert had said. Back then, I believed those words completely. Perhaps I still did. But family, helping family was one thing. Family pushing you out of your own home was another. I sat on the edge of the bed and wiped my eyes. Then something occurred to me. This wasn't the first strange thing Michael had done recently. For months now, there had been little moments, questions, conversations that had seemed harmless at the time. Mom, have you updated your will recently? Mom, this house must be worth a fortune now. Mom, have you ever considered downsizing? At first, I thought he was simply concerned. Now I wasn't so sure. Then there was Jennifer. Jennifer had always been polite. Too polite. The kind of polite that never quite reached the eyes. Over the past year, she had begun asking unusual questions whenever she visited. Who handles your finances? Do you have long-term care insurance? What would happen to the house if something happened to you? At the time, I answered without suspicion. Why wouldn't I? She was family. Or so I thought. Suddenly, memories returned with painful clarity. Jennifer insisting on touring the entire house last Christmas. Michael asking whether I still had the original deed. The two of them exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. My stomach tightened. Had this been building for longer than I realized? I stood and walked back into the kitchen. The nursing home papers still sat there like an accusation. I finally picked them up. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Most appeared standard. Medical information, emergency contacts, living arrangements. Then I reached the final section. Attached behind the admission forms was another document. Not a nursing home agreement. Property authorization paperwork. My breath caught. The language was legal and confusing, but one sentence stood out clearly. In the event the resident becomes unable to independently manage assets. Assets, not health, not safety, assets. I sat down heavily in the chair. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Michael didn't fully understand what he was asking me to sign. Or maybe... No. I couldn't finish the thought. A mother spends her entire life protecting her child from pain. No one prepares her for the day she must protect herself from her child. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of Robert's oak tree. The shadows moved across the kitchen floor. And for the first time in my life, inside the house my husband built and my son grew up in, I no longer felt entirely safe. As I looked once more at Robert's photograph on the mantel, a memory surfaced from years ago. One evening, long before his illness, Robert had held my hand and said quietly, "If anything ever happens to me, promise me one thing, Maddie." "What is it?" I had asked. "Never let anyone make you forget your worth." At the time, I laughed and told him he worried too much. That night, sitting alone in our kitchen with nursing home papers spread before me, I realized something terrifying. Maybe Robert had seen something coming long before I ever did. And maybe, just maybe, my husband had left behind more than memories. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house sounded different after what had happened at dinner. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the wind brushing against the windows. Even the old grandfather clock Robert bought on our 25th anniversary seemed louder somehow. Tick, tick, tick. Time had a strange way of changing people. Or perhaps it simply revealed who they had always been. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, as I had for most of my life. Old habits stay with teachers long after retirement. I made coffee, stood on the porch with my favorite blue mug, and watched the South Carolina sky slowly turn pink. Normally, mornings brought me peace. That morning brought questions. I kept replaying Michael's face in my mind. He hadn't looked cruel. That was what troubled me most. Cruelty is easier to fight than desperation. I knew my son. At least, I believed I did. Michael had never been greedy as a child. He wasn't the kind of boy who stole candy or lied about homework. After Robert died 11 years earlier, Michael had become even more protective of me, or perhaps I had mistaken attention for protection. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Michael. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Good morning, sweetheart." His voice sounded forced. "Morning, Mom. Did you have a chance to look over the paperwork?" Straight to the point. No, how did you sleep? No, are you okay? Just paperwork. My heart sank. I glanced at it, I said carefully. Oh, great. Jennifer found a really nice place. They have activities and nurses 24 hours a day. Jennifer found, not Michael. Jennifer. I'm still thinking about it. A long silence followed. Then he laughed nervously. Well, there's no rush, of course. But his voice carried urgency, the kind people try to hide. We ended the call politely, but when I set down my phone, I felt older than 68. Not because of age, because of disappointment. Around noon, I decided to bring Emma the lemon cookies she loved. My granddaughter had inherited Robert's sweet tooth and my love of baking. If there was one bright light in all this confusion, it was 14-year-old Emma. I drove to Michael's house without calling ahead. Perhaps part of me wanted to see things for myself. When I pulled into the driveway, Jennifer's luxury SUV sat outside, gleaming in the sun. A newer model. Expensive. Very expensive. I frowned. Michael had once told me they were trying to save money. The front door wasn't fully closed when I walked up the steps. I was about to knock when I heard voices inside. Sharp voices. Angry voices. I froze. Jennifer was speaking first. How much longer are we supposed to wait, Michael? Her tone was cold. Frustrated. She's still thinking, Michael replied quietly. Thinking. They were talking about me. I told you this months ago, Jennifer snapped. If we don't solve this now, we lose everything. Everything? My pulse quickened. Michael lowered his voice. You think I don't know that? Then stop acting guilty. Guilty. The word hit me like ice water. I hate doing this, Michael whispered. For a moment, I heard my son again, not the man with papers. The little boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. Jennifer sighed impatiently. Hating it won't pay the bank. The bank? I stood perfectly still. Bank, debt, money. Suddenly, pieces began falling into place. Michael spoke again. She's my mother. And Emma is your daughter, Jennifer fired back immediately. Do you want her changing schools, losing this house? Because that's exactly where we're headed. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Jennifer said the sentence that made my blood run cold. We need to finish this before it's too late. Finish this. I quietly stepped back from the door. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the container of cookies. I didn't want them to know I had heard. Not yet. As I turned toward my car, the front door suddenly opened. Grandma? Emma stood there holding her backpack. Her brown eyes widened with surprise. Grandma, I didn't know you were here. Behind her, Michael and Jennifer instantly stopped talking. Their faces changed so quickly, it would have been almost funny if it hadn't hurt so much. Michael forced a smile. Mom, you should have called. I smiled gently. I was just dropping off cookies for Emma. Jennifer's smile appeared a second later. Perfect. Practiced. Empty. That's so thoughtful. Emma hugged me tightly, far tighter than usual. Something was wrong. Children know long before adults admit the truth. I have piano practice later, Emma said quietly. Can I come visit you after school tomorrow? Her voice carried a hidden plea. I looked into her eyes. Fear. There was fear there. Of course, sweetheart. Jennifer immediately interrupted. We'll see how busy things are. Emma's shoulders fell. My heart broke a little. When I finally left, I drove home slowly. My mind replayed every word I had overheard. The bank, lose everything, finish this. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see. That evening, as I watered my flowers, I remembered another strange incident from months earlier. Michael had once asked if I kept my financial records organized. Jennifer had asked whether I had long-term care insurance. At Christmas, she spent nearly an hour walking through every room of my house. At the time, I thought she admired the renovations Robert had done. Now I wondered if she had been measuring something else. Value, assets, possibilities. The next afternoon, Emma arrived at my house carrying her school bag. She looked exhausted. 14-year-olds shouldn't carry burdens this heavy. I made hot chocolate while she sat quietly at the kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she finally whispered, "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart? Are Mom and Dad going to lose our house?" The question struck me like lightning. I slowly set down my cup. "What makes you ask that?" Emma looked down. "They fight about money all the time now." Her voice trembled. "I hear things. Children always do, even when adults think they don't." "What kind of things?" Emma hesitated. Then tears filled her eyes. "Dad said he made a mistake." My chest tightened. "A mistake?" She nodded. "Mom said if something doesn't happen soon, the bank will take everything." Everything. There was that word again. I reached across the table and took her hand. Warm, small, still a child. "Sweetheart, none of this is your fault." Her voice broke. "I don't want our family to fall apart." Neither did I. At that moment, I realized something painful. This wasn't only about money. Debt doesn't stay inside bank accounts. It enters kitchens, bedrooms, dinner tables. It changes voices. It changes marriages. Sometimes it changes people. That night after Emma left, I sat alone in Robert's recliner. The same chair where he used to read the newspaper every Sunday morning. Outside, the old oak tree swayed in the evening breeze. Inside, my world felt increasingly uncertain. Michael was hiding something far larger than I had imagined. The question was no longer whether my son had financial trouble. The question was, how desperate had he become? And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that no amount of coffee could cure. Charleston was unusually quiet that day. Rain clouds hung low over the neighborhood, and the old oak tree outside my kitchen window swayed gently in the wind. Robert used to say storms had a way of forcing people indoors, forcing them to sit with truths they had been avoiding. Perhaps he was right, because there was one truth I had been avoiding for 11 years. After Robert died, I stopped opening certain doors in this house. Not physical doors, emotional ones. There were rooms in grief that I simply refused to enter. His closet, his workshop, the attic where he stored old boxes. I told myself I was preserving memories, but maybe I had really been preserving pain. That morning, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, I found myself climbing the narrow attic stairs. The wooden steps creaked beneath my feet. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Sunlight slipped through the small attic window, illuminating boxes that had not been touched in years. Christmas decorations, old photo albums, Michael's school projects, and in the far corner, Robert's cedar chest. My breath caught. I hadn't opened it since the week after his funeral. The chest itself wasn't remarkable. It was handcrafted, polished by Robert's own hands decades ago, but what it contained had always felt sacred, private, untouchable. For years, I had convinced myself I wasn't ready. Maybe I wasn't. But life rarely waits until we feel ready. My hands trembled as I knelt beside it. The brass latch clicked open. Inside lay neatly organized folders, letters, and documents. That was Robert. Even in death, he remained organized. I smiled sadly. "Still taking care of us," I whispered. At the very top rested an envelope. My name was written across it in Robert's handwriting, Madeleine. No one had called me by my full name quite like he had. Just seeing his handwriting made my eyes burn with tears. Then I noticed another line written beneath my name. A sentence. One I had never seen before. "Only open this if our family forgets who you are." I stopped breathing. My hands froze. For several seconds, I simply stared. The words felt impossible, as though Robert himself had reached across time. Forget who you are, not forget what you own, not forget what you leave behind. Forget who you are. Tears blurred my vision. "Oh, Robert," I whispered. "What did you know?" My husband had been many things, patient, kind, quiet. But Robert had also been observant. He noticed details others missed. Years ago, he once predicted a business collapse months before it happened. He understood people better than most. Had he foreseen this? Had he worried about what might happen after he was gone? With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. I recognized his handwriting instantly. Steady, precise, familiar. I began to read. My dearest Maddie, if you are reading this letter, then something has happened that I prayed never would. Perhaps someone you love has mistaken your kindness for weakness. My heart stopped. Weakness? Was that what Michael and Jennifer saw when they looked at me now? An elderly woman living alone? Someone easy to move? Easy to convince? Easy to forget? I continued reading through tears. You have spent your entire life giving, to me, to Michael, to your students, to everyone around you. But promise me this, never allow anyone to convince you that age makes you less valuable. I pressed my hand over my mouth, because for the first time since that dinner, I realized something painful. Part of me had already begun believing it. The world has a quiet way of making older women invisible. People speak over us, decide for us, patronize us, as though wisdom disappears with wrinkles. But Robert had never treated me that way, not once. I continued reading. I know our son has a good heart, but good people can make terrible choices when fear enters their lives. I paused. Fear, not evil, fear. Robert always saw people with compassion, even before mistakes happened. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Years ago, I made arrangements to protect you if circumstances ever required it. My pulse quickened. Protect me? I shunned the page. Attached to the letter was a list of account numbers, investment records, legal documents, and a name I recognized immediately. William Carter, Robert's former business partner. I had not spoken to William in nearly 8 years. The two men had worked together for decades. After Robert's death, life simply carried us in different directions. Beneath William's name was another note written by Robert. If you ever need help, William knows what to do. I stared at the documents in disbelief. What exactly had Robert done? The papers referenced trusts, investment accounts, financial holdings. Some terms I recognized, others I did not. But one thing became clear very quickly. Robert had hidden more than memories. He had left safeguards, protections, a plan. Tucked inside the envelope was one final handwritten page. This one was shorter, more personal. My beautiful Maddie. If you are reading this, remember something important. You were strong before you met me. You will remain strong after I am gone. Do not surrender your dignity for the comfort of others. And if our family loses its way, guide them with wisdom, but never allow them to destroy you. By then, I was openly crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain. The kind that comes from being loved. Deeply, completely, even after death. I sat there in the attic for nearly an hour. Rain tapped softly against the roof. The world outside continued as normal. Cars passed, dogs barked, people lived their ordinary lives. And inside that dusty attic, my life quietly changed. For days, I had felt powerless, old, vulnerable, afraid. But Robert's words reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was still Madeleine Albright, the same woman who taught children for 35 years, the same woman who buried her husband and somehow kept living, the same woman who built a family from love and sacrifice. Age had changed my hair, not my worth. I carefully placed the documents back inside the envelope. Then I noticed something tucked beneath the cedar chest lining. A small sealed card. I had nearly missed it. Written on the front were 4 words, "For the right moment." My hands trembled again. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was only a single sentence. Call William before signing anything. Nothing else. No explanation. No details. Just that. I stared at the card as thunder rolled outside. At that exact moment, a strange feeling settled over me. Not certainty. Not yet. But something close. For the first time since Michael placed those nursing home papers before me, I no longer felt helpless. Because perhaps Robert had anticipated something I never imagined. And perhaps my husband's final act of love had only just begun. The next morning, I called Susan Parker before my courage could leave me. Susan had been my closest friend for nearly 40 years. We had met when Michael was in kindergarten, and her daughter Claire was in my second-grade class. Back then, Susan was a young attorney with sharp eyes, sharper opinions, and the kindest heart I had ever known. She was retired now, but retirement had not softened her mind. If anything, it had made her more direct. When she answered the phone, I tried to sound calm. "Susan, I need to ask you something." There was a pause. Then her voice changed. "What happened?" That was the thing about old friends. They hear the truth before you say it. I looked at the nursing home papers spread all across my kitchen table. Michael gave me some documents to sign. "What kind of documents?" "Nursing home admission forms." Silence. Then Susan said quietly, "Madeleine, are you planning to move into a nursing home?" "No." "Then don't sign a thing." My throat tightened. "There's more." I told her about the dinner, Jennifer's strange politeness, Michael's trembling voice, and the property paperwork hidden beneath the admission forms. I told her about Robert's envelope and the note telling me to call William before signing anything. Susan listened without interrupting. That alone frightened me. Susan only stayed quiet when something was serious. Finally, she said, "Bring everything to my house. Now." An hour later, I was sitting in Susan's sunroom with a cup of untouched tea in front of me. Her house smelled like lemon polish and old books. Legal journals still lined one entire wall, even though she claimed she had left the law behind. Susan Parker could no more leave the law behind than I could stop correcting grammar on grocery store signs. She sat across from me wearing reading glasses on a silver chain, the documents arranged neatly before her. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then her mouth tightened. Then she stopped turning pages. That was when fear climbed into my chest. "What is it?" I asked. Susan didn't answer right away. She picked up one page, read it again, then looked at me over her glasses. "Madeleine, who prepared these?" "I don't know. Michael said Jennifer found the facility." "This didn't come directly from a nursing home packet." My hands turned cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean, some of this is standard admission paperwork, medical history, emergency contacts, consent to care. But these pages," she tapped the bottom section with one finger, "these are not ordinary." I leaned forward. Susan continued slowly now, choosing each word with care. "This document appears to give a designated representative authority to manage certain financial and property matters if you are deemed unable to manage them independently." I stared at her. "But I'm able. I know that. I pay my bills. I drive. I cook. I volunteer at church twice a week." "I know, Maddie." "Then why would they need this?" Susan's face softened. "That is exactly the question." A wave of nausea moved through me. For a moment, I wanted to snatch the papers back and run home. I wanted to pretend none of this was real. I wanted to believe my son had simply misunderstood. But Susan kept reading. Her eyes moved from page to page, and with each passing minute, I felt the ground beneath my life shift a little more. "This clause is vague," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means it could be interpreted broadly, too broadly." She turned another page. "And this section references your residence." "My house?" "Yes." My voice became small. "Robert's house." Susan looked at me then, and her expression changed from legal concern to personal anger. "That house is yours." I swallowed hard. Could Michael have known what this meant? Susan leaned back in her chair. "That depends." "On what?" "On who explained it to him." I looked toward the garden outside her window. Bright red cardinals moved through the shrubs, cheerful and unaware. "I heard Jennifer yesterday," I admitted. Susan's eyes sharpened. "What did you hear?" I told her about the argument, the bank, the fear of losing everything. Jennifer telling Michael they needed to finish this before it was too late. When I finished, Susan removed her glasses and set them down carefully. That simple gesture scared me more than any words could have. "Madeleine," she said, "I'm going to say this as your friend first, Not your attorney. I nodded. You are in danger of being manipulated. The room went still. Not physical danger, not the kind that leaves bruises. Something quieter, more humiliating. The kind of danger that comes wrapped in concern. For your safety, for your future, for your own good. I pressed my hands together in my lap. My son wouldn't hurt me. Susan's expression did not change. I believe Michael loves you. A tear slipped down my cheek. But love does not prevent people from making selfish choices. Those words landed harder than I expected. Because deep down, I knew she was right. How did I not see this? I whispered. Susan reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Because you're a mother. Mothers don't look for betrayal in their children's faces. I broke then. Not loudly, just a quiet collapse. My shoulders shook, and tears fell onto the napkin in my lap. Susan did not rush me. She simply sat there, holding my hand, allowing the grief to be what it was. Finally, I wiped my eyes. What do I do? Susan straightened. Now the retired attorney returned. First, you sign nothing. I won't. Second, you make copies of everything. I can do that. Third, we review your existing will, deed, accounts, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, everything. My heart pounded again. That sounds serious. It is serious. She gathered the papers into a neat stack. And fourth, we contact William Carter. At the sound of his name, Robert's letter seemed to echo inside me. Call William before signing anything. Do you think Robert knew? I asked. Susan was quiet for a moment. I think Robert knew people can change when money is involved. I looked down. Even family? Especially family. The answer hurt because it was honest. Susan stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing notes with quick, precise movements. What are you doing? Making a list. For what? For your protection. Protection. The word filled me with both comfort and sorrow. A woman should not need protection from her own child. But sometimes life brings us to doors we never expected to open. Susan asked me questions for nearly 2 hours. Who had access to my bank accounts? Had I signed anything recently? Did Michael know where I kept important documents? Had Jennifer ever taken me to any appointments? Had anyone suggested I was forgetful, confused, or unsafe alone? That last question made my stomach twist, because I remembered something. 3 weeks earlier, at lunch, Jennifer had laughed when I forgot the name of a restaurant we used to visit. See? She had said lightly. This is why we worry about you, Madeleine. Everyone had chuckled, even me. But now the memory felt different. Not like a joke, like a seed being planted. I told Susan. Her jaw tightened. Write that down. What? Every incident, every strange comment, every time someone suggested you couldn't manage yourself. Dates if you remember them. A chill moved through me. Do you think they're trying to make me look incompetent? I don't know yet, Susan said. But we are not going to wait until we find out the hard way. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted across the floor, and my tea had gone cold. Susan placed the nursing home papers inside a folder and handed it back to me. Keep this somewhere safe. I nodded. And Madeleine? Yes? Her voice softened again. Do not confront them yet. That surprised me. Why not? Because right now, they don't know what you know. I held the folder against my chest. And that gives me power? Susan smiled faintly. For the first time in this situation, yes. Driving home, I felt different. Not happy, not relieved, but steadier. The sadness was still there. The betrayal still ached beneath my ribs. But beneath the pain, something else had begun to rise. A quiet strength. The same strength I had felt in Robert's attic. The same strength I thought age had taken from me. When I pulled into my driveway, my house no longer looked like a place someone could steal from me. It looked like a promise. Robert's promise. My promise. And as I stepped inside, I set the folder on the kitchen table and whispered into the quiet room. Not yet, Michael. because my son may have put my name on a nursing home form. But now I had Susan Parker reading the fine print, and he had no idea what that meant. For the next few days, I did exactly what Susan told me to do. I stayed quiet. At my age, people often mistake silence for weakness. They forget that silence can also be observation, and I had spent 35 years as an elementary school teacher. Teachers notice things: who is telling the truth, who is afraid, who is pretending, most importantly, who needs help and who is hiding something. Every morning, I continued my routine, as though nothing had changed. I watered my hydrangeas, volunteered at church on Wednesdays, met my neighbor Carol for coffee on Fridays, and whenever Michael called, I sounded exactly like the same mother he had always known: calm, gentle, trusting. Inside, however, I was beginning to see my family through entirely new eyes. 3 days after my visit with Susan, Michael called again. "Mom?" "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded tired, not nervous this time, exhausted. "Have you thought more about the facility?" The facility? He couldn't even say nursing home anymore. I closed my eyes. "I'm still considering it." His exhale came quickly, almost relieved. "Take your time." But again, his voice betrayed him. People often say one thing while their fear says another. After we hung up, I sat quietly at my kitchen table, the same table where Michael used to do his homework, the same table where Robert once balanced our checkbook every Sunday night. I stared at the wood grain beneath my fingers. How many times had this family gathered here? Birthdays, graduations, Christmas dinners. And now, secrets. The next day, Susan called. "I found something." My pulse quickened immediately. "What is it?" I asked an old colleague to check public financial records. I sat straighter. "Can you do that?" She chuckled softly. "Retired attorneys still have friends." I smiled for the first time in days. Then her voice grew serious again. "Michael and Jennifer are in deeper trouble than you realize." My stomach tightened. "How deep?" She hesitated. That frightened me. Susan never hesitated without reason. "There are signs of significant financial distress." "What kind of signs?" "Second mortgage." I froze. Second mortgage? Michael and Jennifer's home had already been expensive. Why would they need a second mortgage? Susan continued. "Several liens appear connected to business investments." Business investments. Michael had always prided himself on being a financial advisor. Irony can be cruel, helping others manage money while losing control of your own. "There's more," Susan said quietly. Of course there was. "There are indications of overdue payments." I gripped the phone tighter. "How overdue?" "I don't know exactly, but enough to concern me." After we ended the call, I sat motionless. I suddenly remembered Robert's favorite saying: "Debt grows in darkness." At the time, he had meant credit cards. Now I realized he had also meant secrets, because debt rarely stays financial. It becomes emotional, relational, spiritual, and eventually, generational. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store. Life has a strange habit of continuing during heartbreak. People still need milk, bills still arrive. The world keeps moving even when your own feels broken. As I loaded groceries into my car, I heard someone call my name. "Madeleine!" I turned. It was Linda Morrison, Jennifer's friend, the kind of woman who always knew everyone's business before they did. She smiled warmly. "Jennifer told me she's been so stressed lately." My chest tightened. "Has she?" "Oh, yes," Linda continued without hesitation. "She said the financial markets have been terrible, and Michael's investments haven't gone as planned." Investments. Plural. Not one mistake. Several. I kept my face calm. "What kind of investments?" Linda lowered her voice as though sharing gossip. "You know how these things are. Real estate, private funds, riskier opportunities." My blood ran cold. Risk. That word again. Robert hated unnecessary risk. "Michael always was ambitious," I said carefully. Linda laughed. "Well, Jennifer says once they get through this rough patch, everything will be fine." Once they get through this. With whose money? Whose house? Mine? I drove home with my thoughts spinning. For years, I had believed Michael inherited Robert's caution. Perhaps instead, he inherited my tendency to trust. Or perhaps pressure changes people. By evening, rain had begun falling softly against the windows. I sat in Robert's recliner with an old photo album. Sometimes pain drives us backward before we can move forward. The first photo showed Michael at age 6, missing front teeth, holding a fishing pole far too big for him. Robert kneeling beside him, both smiling. I touched the picture gently. Where had life turned? When had fear become stronger than love? Then I found another photograph. Michael graduating from college, Robert standing proudly beside him. I remembered that day vividly. Michael had cried, not because of the diploma, because he knew how hard we had worked to help him get there. "We'll take care of you one day," he had promised us. Promises. People rarely break them all at once. They break them little by little, compromise by compromise, fear by fear, excuse by excuse. The next morning, while sorting old tax papers in my office, I came across something unexpected. A folder labeled, "Michael, Emergency Assistance." My heart sank. Inside were records spanning nearly 20 years. $5,000 when Michael lost his first job, $10,000 when Emma was born and medical bills piled up, $15,000 to help with the down payment on their house. Small loans, large gifts, checks I had forgotten. Support given quietly, without conditions, without expectations. I added the numbers. My breath caught. Over the years, Robert and I had helped Michael with more than $200,000. $200,000. Not once had we asked for repayment. Not once had we reminded him, that is what parents do. Or perhaps what parents think they should do. For the first time, I asked myself a difficult question. Had my love protected my son? Or prevented him from learning consequences? The thought hurt, because mothers rarely question generosity. But age teaches us something younger people often resist. Love without boundaries can become permission. I closed the folder slowly. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, another storm was gathering. That evening, Michael called again. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Mom, Jennifer found another wonderful community. They have gardening classes." Gardening classes, as though flowers could replace home, as though scheduled activities could replace memories. "That sounds lovely," I said softly. "You should come tour it with us this weekend." My pulse quickened. This weekend? Why the urgency? "Perhaps?" A pause. Then Michael asked casually, "By the way, have you thought about what you'd do with the house?" There it was. Not my health. Not my happiness. The house. Always the house. I stared out the window toward the porch Robert built 40 years earlier. "I haven't decided anything." Silence. Then Michael laughed lightly. "Well, property values are very high right now." Property values. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, clarity. At last, clarity. Because for weeks I had wondered whether I was imagining things, whether grief and age had made me suspicious. But mothers know, even when they don't want to. And now I knew this. My son was afraid. Jennifer was desperate. Their debts were growing. And my home, the home Robert built, had become their solution. After we hung up, I walked outside into the cool evening air. The oak tree swayed gently above me, the same tree planted when Michael was born. I placed my hand against its rough bark. Strong, steady, rooted. Robert used to say, "Trees survive storms because their roots go deeper than the wind." I looked up at the branches overhead, and for the first time since those nursing home papers appeared on my table, I stopped feeling like prey, because I was beginning to understand something important. Desperate people make dangerous decisions, but they also make mistakes. And somewhere inside all this debt, all these secrets, all this fear, Michael and Jennifer had made one mistake they never saw coming. They had underestimated me. 2 days after Michael invited me to tour the nursing home, Emma came to see me alone. I remember the exact time, 3:47 in the afternoon. The sun hung low over Charleston, painting long shadows across my front yard. I had just taken a batch of cornbread out of the oven when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my heart immediately tightened. Emma stood on the porch wearing her school backpack. Her eyes were red. Not from allergies, not from the wind, from crying. "Emma?" I asked softly. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Before I could say another word, she threw her arms around me. And then she began to sob. Not the quiet crying teenagers try to hide, the kind that comes when a child has been carrying too much for too long. I held her close. At 14, she was nearly as tall as I was now, but in that moment, she felt like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "Come inside," I whispered. She nodded. I led her to the kitchen. The kitchen had always been the safest room in our family. It was where homework was finished. Cookies were baked. Arguments were solved, or at least they used to be. I poured hot chocolate into one of her favorite mugs, the yellow one with tiny sunflowers painted around the rim. Robert had bought it for her when she was 7. "Grandpa said this mug looked happy," she once told me. Today, she barely touched it. That frightened me. Children stop eating when their hearts are hurting. We sat quietly for several minutes. I had learned long ago that silence often invites truth better than questions. Finally, Emma spoke. "Grandma!" Her voice cracked. "Yes, sweetheart?" She stared down at her hands. "Are you really moving away?" The question pierced me. So this was how they had presented it. Not Grandma is being forced out. Not Grandma is being pressured. Simply, Grandma is moving away. I reached for her hand. "No, honey, nothing has been decided." Her shoulders trembled. "But Mom said you'll be happier there." Happier, such a convenient word. People often use kindness to disguise decisions that benefit themselves. I forced a gentle smile. "Did your mother say that?" Emma nodded. "She said older people shouldn't live alone." The sentence sounded painfully familiar. Older people, as though age itself were an illness, as though growing old erased a lifetime of wisdom. I took a slow breath. "Emma, do you think I'm unhappy here?" She looked around the kitchen, at Robert's clock, at the family photographs, at the window overlooking the backyard swing. Then she shook her head immediately. "No." Simple, honest. Children see clearly before the world teaches them otherwise. "Then why are you crying?" I asked softly. That was when her face crumpled. The kind of heartbreak no child should carry. "Because I heard Mom talking." My chest tightened. Talking. I remembered Susan's warning. Listen carefully. Sometimes truth enters a room disguised as conversation. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" Emma wiped her eyes. "At night, after they think I'm asleep." Her voice grew quieter. "They fight about money all the time." There it was again. Money. The invisible guest sitting at every family table. "What do they say?" She hesitated. I almost told her she didn't have to answer. But then she whispered, "Mom said once you move out, they can sell the house quickly." Sell the house. The words hit me harder than I expected, even though part of me had already suspected it. Suspicion hurts. Confirmation destroys. I felt my stomach twist. Robert's house. Our house. The house where Michael learned to walk. The house where we buried our old dog beneath the oak tree. The house where I held Robert's hand during his final days. Sell it quickly, as though memories could be measured in square footage, as though love could be listed on the market. I kept my voice calm for Emma's sake. "Did your father say anything?" Her expression changed. Something softer, something sadder. "Dad cried." I froze. "Your father cried?" She nodded. "I've never seen him cry before." Neither had I. Not since Robert's funeral. My heart ached, because despite everything, Michael was still my son. And mothers carry two pains at once, the pain of being hurt and the pain of seeing their children suffer. "What did he say?" I asked. Emma looked down. "He said he didn't have a choice anymore." Choice. The word lingered in the room because life is made of choices, and sometimes we tell ourselves we have none, when what we really mean is that we dislike the consequences of the choices we do have. I squeezed her hand gently. Emma, listen to me. She looked up. No matter what happens, you are loved. Fresh tears filled her eyes. But families aren't supposed to do this. Her words nearly broke me. Out of the mouths of children. She was right. Families aren't supposed to hurt each other. But families are made of human beings. And human beings are flawed. Fear makes us selfish. Debt makes us desperate. Shame makes us hide. And hidden pain has a way of spreading. I don't want everyone to hate each other, Emma whispered. I moved beside her and wrapped my arms around her shoulders. Neither of us spoke for a while. The kitchen remained quiet, except for the ticking of Robert's clock. Tick, tick, tick. Time keeps moving, even when hearts stand still. Eventually, Emma pulled back. There's something else. My pulse quickened. What is it? She bit her lip nervously. I wasn't supposed to hear this. Children hear far more than adults realize. What did you hear? Her voice became almost a whisper. Mom said they need to move fast before summer ends. My mind immediately began calculating. It was June. Only weeks remained before school started again. My breath caught. That explained the urgency. The repeated phone calls, the pressure, the rushed paperwork. They had a timeline, a deadline, and they had never told me. How long ago did you hear that? I asked carefully. Last week, before dinner, before the nursing home papers, which meant they had planned everything before ever asking me, not asking, presenting, assuming. My chest tightened painfully. At some point, my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a problem to solve. Emma suddenly looked frightened. Grandma, are you mad at Dad? What a question. Children often ask the hardest things. Was I angry? Yes. Was I heartbroken? Even more. But love is complicated, especially a mother's love. I'm hurt, I answered honestly. Her eyes filled again. Are you going to leave? I looked around the kitchen, at the curtains I had sewn by hand, at the family photos lining the wall, at the worn wooden table Robert built for our 20th anniversary. Then I thought about the oak tree outside. Roots, storms, endurance. I smiled gently and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Sweetheart, I said softly, sometimes grown-ups forget what truly matters. She stared at me. But eventually, I paused, because for the first time since this nightmare began, I actually believed it. The truth finds its way home. She hugged me again before leaving, and as I watched her walk down the driveway toward her parents' house, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, not bitterness, purpose. Because this was no longer only about me. It was about Emma, about protecting the future Robert and I had built, about ensuring that love survived where greed had entered. That evening, after sunset, I sat alone on the porch swing Robert built decades earlier. Fireflies danced across the yard. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and for the first time in weeks, I stopped asking what Michael had done. Instead, I asked a different question. How could I save what remained of this family? Because despite everything, I still believed some things were worth fighting for. But as I sat beneath the oak tree planted the year Michael was born, I realized something else. Emma had unknowingly given me the one piece of information I desperately needed. A date, a deadline, a clock was ticking, and now, for the first time, I knew exactly how much time I had left. The morning after Emma's visit, I woke before dawn. Not because I had slept well, quite the opposite. Some nights, age steals sleep. Other nights, worry does. That night, worry had won. The sky outside was still dark as I sat alone at my kitchen table with Robert's letter spread before me. For the 100th time, I read the final instruction. Call William before signing anything. For 11 years, that sentence had waited quietly in a cedar chest, waiting for this exact moment. I traced Robert's handwriting with my fingertips. Even now, it amazed me how love could outlive death, how a man could still protect his wife long after he was gone. At precisely 8:30 that morning, I picked up the phone. My heart pounded harder than it had had in years. William Carter. I hadn't spoken to him since shortly after Robert's funeral. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years. Then life, as it often does, quietly carried us in different directions. I dialed the number listed in Robert's envelope. To my surprise, it still worked. The phone rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered. William Carter speaking. For a moment, I couldn't speak. His voice sounded older, slower, but unmistakably the same. William? A brief silence followed. Then warmth entered his voice immediately. Madeleine! Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. It had been so long since someone who truly knew Robert had spoken his name. Hello, William? My goodness, he said softly. After all these years. We talked awkwardly for a few minutes. About Charleston, about aging, about grandchildren, the safe subjects older people often discuss when they are avoiding painful ones. Finally, I took a deep breath. William, I found a letter from Robert. The line went silent. Not surprised, not confused. Silent. My pulse quickened. You know about the letter? It wasn't a question. William exhaled slowly. Yes. A chill ran through me. Robert truly had planned this. Did he leave instructions for you too? I asked quietly. Another pause. Then William answered. Yes, Maddie, he did. Maddie. Only Robert and a few old friends still called me that. The sound nearly broke my heart. What exactly did Robert ask you to do? William's voice became serious. He told me to wait. Wait for what? For your call. I closed my eyes. 11 years. Robert had prepared something 11 years ago, and William had waited all this time. Madeleine, William said gently, I think it's time we meet. 2 hours later, I drove to a small cafe overlooking Charleston Harbor. William was already there when I arrived. Time had changed him. His hair was completely white now, his shoulders slightly bent, but his eyes were still sharp. The same eyes that once helped Robert build a successful engineering consulting firm decades ago. When he saw me, he stood immediately. And without saying a word, he hugged me. For a moment, I felt as though a small piece of Robert had returned. We sat near the window overlooking the water. Neither of us rushed. People our age understand that important conversations deserve patience. After coffee arrived, William reached into his leather briefcase. My breath caught. Inside was a thick manila folder, very thick. He carefully placed it on the table between us. This belongs to you. I stared at it. What is it? William looked directly into my eyes. Robert's final plan. My hands began trembling. Slowly, I opened the folder. Inside were account statements, investment reports, legal papers, trust documents, and page after page of financial records. At first, none of it made sense. Then I saw a number. I blinked. Surely I had read it incorrectly. I looked again. No. The number remained the same. My heart nearly stopped. William! My voice barely worked. This can't be right. He nodded quietly. It is. I stared at the figure. Over $3 million. $3 million! My hands shook so violently I had to set the papers down. Robert and I had lived comfortably, but never lavishly. We drove modest cars, took simple vacations, clipped coupons, waited for sales. $3 million was unimaginable. I looked at William in disbelief. Robert never told me. William smiled sadly. That was intentional. I couldn't speak. He continued gently. Your husband invested carefully for decades. Quietly, patiently. He never touched those accounts. I thought back to Robert's habits, his spreadsheets, his notebooks, his endless patience. I used to tease him for reading financial reports during vacations. Now tears burned my eyes. He had never been planning for himself. He had been planning for me. For all these years? I whispered. William nodded. Even before he got sick. My chest tightened. Robert had known. Not only about his illness, about life, its uncertainties, its dangers, its disappointments. He made me promise something, William said softly. I swallowed. What? William's voice lowered. He said, "If Madeline ever calls you, it means she needs protection, not money." Protection. That word again. Not money. Protection. Suddenly, I understood Robert better than ever before. This was never about wealth. It was about dignity, security, freedom. The freedom to never depend on someone who might misuse that dependence. I wiped my eyes. Why keep it secret from Michael? William's expression grew thoughtful. Robert loved your son. I know. But he worried. My stomach tightened. About what? William hesitated. Robert once told me that Michael had a generous heart but struggled with financial discipline. I closed my eyes. Even then. Robert had seen it even then. He believed hardship teaches lessons money cannot. The truth of those words settled heavily inside me. Because over the years, Robert and I had repeatedly rescued Michael. Every setback, every emergency, every mistake. Perhaps we had protected him too well. Perhaps love sometimes becomes shelter from consequences. William reached for another envelope inside the folder. This one carried my name, Madeleine Albright. Robert's handwriting again. My chest ached. Another letter? I whispered. William nodded. He asked me to give you this only if the first letter was ever opened. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The letter was shorter, more personal. My dearest Maddie, if you are reading this, then life has become harder than I hoped it would. Remember something important. Money reveals character. It does not create it. Use what I leave behind wisely. Help when help creates growth. Do not help when help creates dependency. I stopped reading. Dependency. The word struck me deeply. How many times had I confused rescuing with loving? How many times had I saved Michael from consequences that might have taught him responsibility? Tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. William gave me time. Old friends know when silence is kindness. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. William, yes? If Michael knew about this money, I couldn't finish. William answered anyway. Everything would become worse. The painful truth hung between us. He was right. $3 million would not solve desperation. It might only feed it. We spent another hour reviewing documents. Trust structures, investment protections. Robert had built safeguards upon safeguards. The man had truly planned for everything. Everything except dying too soon. When I finally left the cafe, the sun hung low over the harbor. The world looked unchanged. Cars moved, people laughed, seagulls circled overhead, and yet my entire future had shifted. For weeks, I had feared becoming powerless. Now I realized something extraordinary. I had never been powerless. I simply hadn't known what Robert had left behind. Driving home, I felt emotions I could barely name. Relief, grief, love, sorrow, strength. And beneath them all, clarity. Michael believed I was vulnerable. Jennifer believed I was alone. Neither of them knew the truth. Neither knew about Robert's investments. Neither knew about William. Neither knew about the trust. And most importantly, neither of them knew that the woman they were trying to move into a nursing home had just discovered she was worth millions. But strangely enough, the money was no longer the greatest surprise. The greatest surprise was realizing that even after death, Robert had never stopped protecting me. I did not tell Michael about the money. I did not tell Jennifer either. In fact, after meeting William Carter, I told no one except Susan. Secrets can be dangerous, but sometimes truth revealed too early can be even more dangerous. So I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, not because I was afraid, because I was waiting. There is a kind of wisdom that only comes with age. When you are young, you believe every battle must be fought immediately. By the time you reach my age, you learn that timing is often more powerful than force. Robert understood that. Now I was beginning to understand it too. The following Sunday, Michael called again. Mom, Jennifer and I found another community we'd love for you to see. I was standing in my garden trimming roses. The irony nearly made me smile. My son was discussing where to place me while I was tending the flowers his father had planted 30 years ago. How thoughtful, I said gently. Would next Saturday work? There was hope in his voice. Not hope for me. Hope for a signature. I looked toward the oak tree. The same tree planted the year Michael was born. Its roots had survived hurricanes. Perhaps Mother's had roots too. I suppose I could take a look, I replied. His relief was immediate. Really? Of course, sweetheart. For the first time in weeks, I heard genuine happiness in his voice. And strangely, that hurt more than anger would have, because it meant he truly believed he was solving a problem. He no longer saw the cost, only the solution. After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing Robert built decades ago. I hated deception. I had spent my life teaching children honesty. Yet here I was, pretending, waiting, planning. But Susan had been clear. Do not confront them until you are prepared. So I waited. 3 days later, Susan came over carrying 2 folders and a blueberry pie. True friendship at our age often arrives carrying paperwork and dessert. We sat at the kitchen table while sunlight spilled through the windows. She adjusted her glasses and opened the first folder. Your estate documents. The phrase sounded strange. Estate, such a formal word for a lifetime. Inside those papers were 40 years of marriage, savings, memories, sacrifices, Robert's legacy, my legacy. Everything remains in your control, Susan explained. Good, she nodded. But after meeting with William, we need to update several protections. Protections. Again, that word. I was growing accustomed to it now. Tell me what to do. Susan smiled slightly. That's the Madeleine I know. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed everything. My will, medical directives, property ownership, trust documents, Robert's hidden investments. Susan was meticulous. By the end, my head ached. But for the first time since the nursing home papers appeared, I understood my own finances better than ever before. Knowledge brings peace, and peace brings strength. Before leaving, Susan looked directly at me. Have you decided what happens next? I thought for a moment. Yes. And? I folded my hands. I want the truth. Susan tilted her head. What kind of truth? The kind people reveal when they think they've already won. Her eyes softened. Robert would have been proud. That thought alone nearly made me cry. The following week, I deliberately became more agreeable. When Michael mentioned the nursing home, I listened. When Jennifer spoke about safety, I nodded politely. When they suggested downsizing, I asked questions. Simple questions. Harmless questions. People reveal much when they feel comfortable, far more than when they feel challenged. One evening, Jennifer invited me over for dinner. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. I accepted. That night, I sat at their dining table, watching my family like a teacher observing a classroom. Michael looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He had lost weight, more than before. Jennifer, however, remained perfectly polished. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile. Yet perfection often cracks under pressure. And pressure was everywhere. Halfway through dinner, Jennifer casually said, "If you move into a community, you'd have so much less responsibility." Responsibility? Interesting choice of word. I smiled politely. And what would happen to the house? The question landed exactly as I expected. Michael froze. Jennifer answered too quickly. Oh, we could help manage it. Could, help, manage. Carefully chosen words. Not own, not sell, not yet. I took a sip of tea. I imagine upkeep is expensive. Jennifer nodded eagerly. Exactly. Property taxes alone are enormous nowadays. There it was. Money. Always money. Emma sat quietly beside me. She barely touched her dinner. Children absorb tension like sponges absorb water. I squeezed her hand beneath the table. She squeezed back. After dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I walked down the hallway, I heard voices drifting from the study. Michael and Jennifer, arguing again. Not loudly, but urgently. Don't push too hard, Michael whispered. We don't have time, Jennifer hissed. Time. Again. Always time. Give her another week. A week. My pulse quickened. Jennifer's voice sharpened. The bank won't wait. The bank. There it was again, the invisible third person living inside their marriage. Debt had become another member of the family. I quietly returned to the living room before they noticed I had heard. Emma looked at me. Her expression carried something children rarely wear. Worry beyond their years. That night, when I drove home, sadness settled over me like evening fog. I remembered Michael at age 12. He once saved allowance money for 6 months to buy me a birthday necklace. It cost $15. I still kept it in my jewelry box. Back then, he measured wealth in love. Somewhere along the way, the measurements changed. The next morning, I visited Robert's grave. I often did when life became too heavy. The cemetery sat beneath large oak trees outside Charleston. Peaceful, quiet. I knelt and brushed leaves from the stone. Robert Albright, 1950 to 2015, beloved husband and father. The word caught my attention, because even now, Robert was still trying to guide our son. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. Then I spoke aloud. I think I understand your plan now. The wind stirred gently around me. I don't want revenge. That much was true. Revenge hardens hearts, and I had spent too many years teaching children kindness to spend my final years nurturing bitterness. No, I whispered. I want truth. Truth. Consequences. Healing. In that order. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. A text message from Michael. Mom, can we have dinner next Sunday? Jennifer and I have some paperwork ready. Paperwork. Of course. I stared at the screen. Then, for the first time since all this began, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I was ready. My fingers moved calmly across the screen. Of course, sweetheart. I'll bring something special. The word carried a meaning only I understood. Because while Michael believed the next dinner would end with my signature, I had other plans. Susan had prepared documents. William stood ready. Robert's trust was secure. And I had finally remembered something the world often forgets about older women. We survive. We adapt. And when necessary, we fight quietly. The next move had already begun. Michael simply didn't know it yet. The Sunday dinner arrived faster than I expected. Funny how time works when your life is changing. The days feel slow. The weeks disappear. That morning, I woke before sunrise. Charleston was still quiet, wrapped in soft blue light. I stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee in my hands and looked out at Robert's oak tree. 42 years. That tree had stood through hurricanes, through droughts, through births, through funerals, through everything. Families, I realized, should be more like trees, bend when storms come, hold fast to their roots, grow together. Somewhere along the way, ours had forgotten how. I dressed carefully that afternoon, not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I wanted to remember who I was. I chose a navy blue dress Robert had always liked, simple pearl earrings, the silver bracelet Michael gave me for my 60th birthday. I stared at that bracelet for a long moment. He had engraved 3 words inside it. Love you always. The irony almost made me cry. Love is strange. Sometimes it survives disappointment. Sometimes it survives betrayal. A mother's love often survives both. At exactly 5 o'clock, I carried my homemade peach cobbler to Michael's house. My hands were steady, far steadier than they had been weeks earlier, because fear grows in uncertainty, and I was no longer uncertain. I knew the truth now. The debt, the pressure, the desperation. Most importantly, I knew my own worth. When Michael opened the door, he smiled. A real smile. Relief flashed briefly across his face. Mom, come in! For a moment, I saw my little boy again, and that hurt, because even now, I still loved him. Jennifer greeted me warmly, too warmly. She hugged me longer than usual. Madeleine, you look wonderful. People often become kinder when they want something. Age teaches you to notice that. Emma came running into the hallway. Grandma! She wrapped her arms around me, and unlike the others, her love needed nothing in return. I held her tightly. Some people save families without even realizing it. Emma was one of those people. The dining room looked beautiful. Candles flickered softly. Fresh flowers sat in the center of the table. Jennifer had gone to great effort. Not for celebration, for persuasion. I recognized the difference now. Dinner began pleasantly enough. We talked about school, weather, church events, ordinary subjects, the kind families discuss when avoiding extraordinary problems. Michael laughed more than usual. Jennifer kept refilling everyone's glasses. Too careful, too attentive. I had taught children long enough to recognize nervous behavior. Adults are not so different. Throughout dinner, I noticed Michael checking his watch repeatedly, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps for the courage. Finally, after dessert, Jennifer smiled. "Madeleine, why don't we move into the living room?" There it was, the moment, the one we had all been approaching for weeks. I nodded calmly. Of course. The living room felt strangely formal. Michael sat across from me, Jennifer beside him. Emma quietly took a seat near the window. And then, Michael pulled out the folder. The same folder, the nursing home papers. Only this time, additional documents rested beneath them. I recognized the edges immediately. Property forms. My heartbeat remained calm. That surprised even me. Fear had left. Clarity had taken its place. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom," his voice trembled. Not from cruelty, from conflict. "I know this hasn't been easy." No, it hadn't. Not for either of us. He continued, "We just want what's best for you." The oldest sentence in the world, and sometimes the most dangerous, because people often hide control inside concern. I folded my hands quietly. "What exactly do you believe is best for me, Michael?" He looked surprised, perhaps because I had never asked directly before. Jennifer stepped in smoothly. "The community is beautiful. You'll have friends, activities, support." Activities, as though bingo nights could replace 40 years of memories. Michael slid the papers toward me. "If you sign these, we can start the process." Can. Not maybe, not if, can. Everything had already been planned. The room grew quiet. I looked down at the documents, then slowly, I closed the folder, without signing. Michael blinked. "Mom?" I smiled gently. "There's someone I'd like you to meet first." Confusion crossed Jennifer's face. "What do you mean?" The doorbell rang, right on time. Susan Parker had always been punctual. Emma looked toward the front door. Michael frowned. Jennifer's smile disappeared. "I invited a friend," I said softly. I rose and opened the door. Susan stood there holding a leather briefcase. Elegant, composed, prepared. Her expression was kind, but there was steel beneath it, the kind of steel forged by decades in courtrooms. Michael's face paled slightly. "Mrs. Parker?" Susan smiled politely. "Michael, it's been years." Jennifer straightened in her chair. Her voice became careful. "Is everything okay?" Susan entered calmly. "Perfectly." She sat beside me, then placed her briefcase on the coffee table. The sound seemed louder than it should have, a simple click. Yet somehow it felt like the opening of a trial. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer crossed her arms. "Madeleine," she said slowly, "I'm not sure I understand." "Oh," I replied gently. "You will." The doorbell rang again. This time, genuine alarm crossed Jennifer's face. I stood. "I invited one more guest." When I opened the door, William Carter smiled warmly. Michael stared. Recognition slowly spread across his face. "Mr. Carter?" William nodded. "Hello, son." Michael looked stunned. He had not seen William since Robert's funeral. No one had. Not until now. The room changed the moment William entered. Some people carry authority quietly. William was one of them. He sat beside Susan. Two witnesses from my past. Two people Robert trusted. And suddenly, for the first time all evening, Jennifer looked nervous. Not uncomfortable. Nervous. Good. Because nervous people often tell the truth. Emma looked between us all with wide eyes. She sensed something important was happening. Children always do. Michael swallowed hard. Mom, what's going on? I looked at my son, really looked at him, the tired eyes, the fear, the shame he had hidden for so long. And for the first time, I saw not a villain, but a frightened man drowning in consequences. My heart broke all over again. Because love doesn't disappear when trust is broken. It simply hurts differently. I folded my hands in my lap, calm, steady, ready. Then I spoke the words that changed everything. Before I sign anything, I said softly, I think it's time we talk honestly about money. The room fell silent. Complete silence. Michael's face turned white. Jennifer stopped breathing for half a second. And in that moment, they realized something they had never expected. I wasn't the confused old woman they thought I was. I had been listening, watching, learning, waiting, and the next move they never saw coming had finally arrived. The silence after my words was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the peaceful silence of a church, not the comfortable silence between old friends. This was the kind of silence that appears when truth enters a room uninvited. No one moved. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. Time had finally caught up with all of us. Michael stared at me as though he had never seen me before. Jennifer's face remained carefully composed, but I noticed it immediately. The tiny tightening around her eyes. Fear, real fear. William sat quietly beside Susan, his hands folded in his lap. He had spent decades in business. He understood that people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they are losing control. Emma looked from one adult to another. Confused, worried, too young to carry the weight of this moment. My heart ached for her. No child should have to watch a family break apart. But sometimes families must face the truth before they can heal. Michael finally cleared his throat. Mom. His voice sounded small, smaller than I had heard in years. What do you mean? I looked at him gently, not with anger, not even with disappointment, just truth. I mean, I said quietly, that before we discuss nursing homes, perhaps we should discuss why this suddenly became so urgent. Michael's face lost color. Jennifer answered first. There's no urgency. The lie came too quickly, too smoothly. Susan opened her briefcase. Actually, she said calmly, there appears to be considerable urgency. Jennifer's head snapped toward her. What exactly is that supposed to mean? Susan removed several documents and laid them neatly on the coffee table. Legal records, public filings, financial documents. The air itself seemed to change. Michael stared at the papers. Recognition flashed across his face. Then fear, deep fear. Where did you get those? He asked. Susan's voice remained steady. Public records are public for a reason. Jennifer crossed her arms. This feels inappropriate. William spoke for the first time. No, he said quietly. What's inappropriate is asking an elderly widow to sign legal documents she doesn't fully understand. The room froze. Elderly widow. Hearing those words spoken aloud struck me harder than I expected. Because that was what I was, but not all of who I was. Jennifer's face hardened. We were only trying to help Madeleine. Help. That word again. Susan adjusted her glasses. Then perhaps you can explain why property management authorization forms were included with nursing home documents. Jennifer opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No answer came, because some questions leave very little room for hiding. I turned to Michael. Did you know those documents involved my property? His eyes dropped immediately. He didn't answer. And in that silence, I received my answer. My chest tightened painfully, not because he had spoken, because he hadn't. Sometimes silence hurts more than words. Michael, I whispered. My son finally looked up. Tears had already formed in his eyes. Mom, his voice cracked. I never wanted to hurt you. The sentence shattered something inside me, because I believed him. That was the tragedy. I believed him. He hadn't wanted to hurt me. He had simply chosen himself when fear demanded a price, and that price had been me. Jennifer straightened in her seat. We didn't have a choice. Susan looked at her sharply. There are always choices. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. Her voice trembled now, not with guilt, with anger. Years of carefully maintained perfection were beginning to crack. You have no idea what we've been dealing with. Michael lowered his head. Jennifer! No! She snapped. No more hiding! Her eyes glistened. For the first time, I saw exhaustion beneath her polished exterior. She turned toward me. Do you know what it's like to watch everything fall apart? I remained silent, because the truth was, I did. I had buried my husband. I had rebuilt a life from grief. I knew exactly what falling apart looked like. Jennifer continued speaking. The words poured out now. Uncontrolled, messy, honest. The investments failed. Michael closed his eyes. She kept going. We borrowed money to cover losses. More silence. We borrowed more to pay earlier debts. The oldest trap in the world. Debt built upon debt. Fear built upon fear. And then interest rates increased, she whispered. Her voice finally broke. And everything collapsed. Michael covered his face with both hands. Emma stared at her parents with wide eyes. No child should hear these things, but perhaps secrets damage children more than truth. I reached for Emma's hand. She squeezed mine tightly. Jennifer laughed bitterly through tears. The bank keeps calling. There it was. The bank. The invisible third person in their marriage. The same bank that had quietly entered every argument, every sleepless night, every desperate decision. Susan looked through her papers. The records indicate a second mortgage. Michael nodded weakly. Yes. Business losses? He nodded again. Several investments failed. How much debt? Susan asked. Michael's voice was barely audible. Almost $800,000. The room went silent. Even I stopped breathing. 800,000. My son, my little boy who once cried over an injured bird, buried beneath nearly $1 million of debt. I suddenly understood something painful. Desperation changes people. Not always because they are evil, sometimes because they are drowning. And drowning people often grab the nearest thing floating, even if it belongs to someone they love. Jennifer looked toward me. Her eyes were red now. Your house was worth enough to save us. There it was. At last. The truth. Not safety, not care, not concern. My house. Robert's house, their lifeboat. The honesty should have satisfied me. Instead, it broke my heart. Because hearing the truth rarely hurts less than imagining it. Michael suddenly began crying. Real crying. The kind that comes when a person can no longer carry the weight of pretending. I'm sorry, Mom. His shoulders shook. I'm so sorry. I had not seen my son cry since Robert's funeral, and suddenly, for a brief moment, I saw him again. Not the 42-year-old financial advisor, not the desperate man sitting before me, but the little boy who ran into my arms after nightmares, the child I once promised to protect forever. My own tears came, not because I had forgiven him, not yet, because love and pain can live in the same heart. Jennifer wiped her face angrily, but instead of remorse, her expression hardened. And then she said the sentence that changed everything. If Robert had left more money, none of this would have happened. The room froze. I stared at her. William's eyes narrowed. Susan slowly removed her glasses. Michael looked horrified. Even Emma gasped softly. Blame. She was blaming a dead man. A man who had worked his entire life. A man who had quietly protected us all. Something inside me shifted then. Not rage. Clarity. Cold, perfect clarity. Because in that moment, I finally understood the difference between Michael and Jennifer. Michael was drowning. Jennifer was still looking for someone else to blame for the water. I folded my hands calmly. Then I spoke. Jennifer. She looked at me. You're wrong. The room held its breath, because none of them knew yet. None of them knew about Robert's letters. the investments, the trust, the millions. And as I looked around at my family, broken, afraid, ashamed, I realized the most difficult part of the story was not exposing the truth. It was deciding what to do with it. Because now I faced a question every mother eventually fears. When your child hurts you, do you save them? Or do you finally let them face the consequences of their choices? And for the first time since all this began, I truly didn't know the answer. That night, after everyone left Michael's house, I drove home alone. The streets of Charleston were quiet. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time in weeks, no tears came. Not because I was no longer hurting, because I had finally run out of shock. There is a strange moment in every heartbreak when grief stops screaming and begins whispering. That was where I was. Whispering grief, the kind that sits beside you in silence. When I pulled into my driveway, I remained in the car for several minutes. The porch light glowed softly. Robert always left the porch light on when I worked late. Home should always look welcoming, he used to say. I looked at the house. Our house. The house everyone seemed to want. And suddenly, I realized something. Not once had anyone asked what I wanted. Michael had spoken about safety. Jennifer had spoken about practicality. The bank had spoken through debt. But no one had asked, Madeleine, what do you want? At 68 years old, after raising a child, bearing a husband, and spending decades caring for others, I wasn't even sure I knew the answer. Inside, I made tea and sat in Robert's recliner. His last letter rested in my lap. I had read it so many times that I nearly knew it by heart. Help when help creates growth. Do not help when help creates dependency. Dependency. That word had followed me like an echo. Perhaps because deep down, I knew it was true. Over the years, Robert and I had helped Michael countless times. His first apartment, his student loans, his medical bills after Emma was born, the down payment for his house. Every time, we told ourselves we were helping family, and perhaps we were. But there is a difference between helping someone stand and carrying them so long they forget how to walk. I closed my eyes. The hardest truths often arrive late in life. The next morning, I called Susan. Can you come over? An hour later, she arrived carrying coffee and bagels. Friendship at our age has less drama and more carbohydrates. We sat at my kitchen table while sunlight streamed through the windows. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Susan asked gently, How are you holding up? I thought carefully before answering. I'm grieving, she nodded. For Robert? I shook my head. For the son I thought I knew. Susan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. No words, just understanding, the kind earned through decades. I told her everything that happened at dinner. Michael's confession, Jennifer's blame, Emma's tears, the look on my son's face when the truth finally surfaced. When I finished, Susan sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked, What do you want to do? There it was again. What do I want? Not what was fair, not what was legal. What did I want? I stared out the kitchen window toward Robert's oak tree. The answer surprised even me. I don't want revenge. Susan smiled softly. I didn't think you did. It was true. Revenge burns too much energy. And at my age, energy becomes precious. No, I wanted something else. I want accountability. Susan nodded immediately. Now she understood. Accountability. Not punishment. Not cruelty. Consequences. Growth. Truth. The things every good teacher hopes for, even when the student is her own child. What about the money? Susan asked. $3 million. Even now, the number felt unreal. I looked down at my hands. Old hands. Hands that had graded papers, held babies, buried a husband. Hands that had built a life. Robert's money. No. Robert's protection. I won't rescue them. Saying the words aloud hurt. Because mothers are natural rescuers. We kiss scraped knees, pay unexpected bills, solve problems before our children even notice them. But sometimes love demands restraint. Susan watched me carefully. Are you sure? No, I wasn't. Not entirely. But certainty is overrated. Wisdom often means choosing the difficult path despite uncertainty. I'm sure enough. That afternoon, I visited Robert's grave again. The cemetery was peaceful beneath the oak trees. A gentle breeze moved through the grass. I placed fresh flowers beside his headstone. Then I sat on the small bench nearby. Your son made terrible choices, I said softly. The wind stirred. But he's still our son. I imagined Robert beside me, quiet, thoughtful, patient. He had always believed people could change, sometimes more than they deserved. Would you forgive him? I whispered. No answer came. Of course not. The dead rarely solve the problems of the living. We must do that ourselves. And perhaps that is part of growing older, realizing that wisdom is not having answers. It is learning to live with difficult questions. When I returned home, I found Emma sitting on my porch swing. My heart immediately tightened. She looked so small, even at 14, especially now. Grandma? I sat beside her. What's wrong, sweetheart? She hesitated. Then she asked the question children ask when they fear losing everything. Are Mom and Dad getting divorced? The air left my lungs. Children always know before adults admit it. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. I don't know. Her eyes filled with tears. I want things to go back to normal. Oh, how I understood that feeling. But life rarely moves backward. It only moves forward. The challenge is deciding what we carry with us. I brushed her hair gently behind her ear. Do you know something your grandfather used to tell me? She shook her head. I smiled softly. He said families aren't strong because they never break. She listened carefully. They're strong because they learn how to repair. Her face softened. Can ours be repaired? What an impossible question. The truth? I didn't know. But hope is sometimes a choice before it becomes a reality. I think so, I said quietly. If everyone tells the truth? She leaned against my shoulder. Children want honesty far more than perfection. Adults often forget that. After Emma left, I walked through my house slowly, touching familiar things. The piano, the bookshelves, Robert's tools in the garage. This house had witnessed every chapter of my life, and now it stood at the center of another. I realized then that protecting this house was never really about property. It was about memory, legacy, roots, the things money can never replace. That evening, I called Michael. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded exhausted. Mom? For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said softly, I love you. He immediately began crying, not loudly, just quietly, like a little boy trying not to be heard. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. And I did. I knew he was sorry. But regret alone does not rebuild trust. Michael, I said gently. Yes? If we're going to heal this family, things must change. He swallowed hard. I'll do anything. Anything, such a dangerous word, because true change is rarely dramatic. It is daily, quiet, repeated. I'm willing to help you rebuild your life, I said carefully. Hope entered his voice immediately, but not by paying your debts. Silence. Painful silence. Then came the hardest sentence I had ever spoken as a mother. You must face the consequences of your choices. I heard him cry softly, and though my heart broke hearing it, I did not take the words back. Because love without boundaries had brought us here. Perhaps love with boundaries could lead us home. When we hung up, I sat quietly in the darkened living room. Outside, the oak trees stood firm beneath the night sky. Storms had come. Storms had gone. Still, it stood. And for the first time since Michael placed those papers in front of me, I finally understood my next move. Not revenge, not rescue, responsibility. Because sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give a child is the chance to become better, even when it hurts them both. The next 2 weeks felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a family after a storm has torn through it. when everyone is still standing among the wreckage, trying? I need to understand what remains. Michael called me every day, not to ask about the house, not about the nursing home, not about paperwork. For the first time in months, he simply called to ask how I was doing. Small things. Did your hydrangeas bloom yet, Mom? Have you been sleeping better? Do you need anything from the grocery store? Ordinary questions, but ordinary kindness has extraordinary power when trust has been broken. Still, I was careful. Forgiveness and trust are not twins. Forgiveness can happen quickly. Trust must be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, day by day. The way Robert built our house. One afternoon, Michael came by unexpectedly carrying a toolbox. I was in the backyard trimming roses when I saw his truck pull into the driveway. For a moment, my stomach tightened. Old wounds do that, even when healing has begun. He stepped out, holding the same toolbox Robert had given him years earlier. Mom, he said quietly. I set down my gardening shears. What's that for? He glanced toward the porch. The railing is loose. I looked up. He was right. One of the wooden railings had been wobbling for months. Robert used to fix those things himself. After he died, I learned many things. Carpentry was not one of them. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. I thought I'd repair it if that's okay. If that's okay. Such a simple phrase. Yet after everything, it mattered deeply. Permission, respect, choice. The very things that had been missing before. I nodded. Thank you. He worked quietly for nearly 2 hours. No talk about money. No hidden motives. No paperwork. Just a son repairing his mother's porch. At one point, I stood in the kitchen window watching him. For a moment, I saw Robert. Same posture, same careful hands, same concentration. Tears stung my eyes. People are complicated. Children inherit both strengths and weaknesses. Michael had inherited Robert's kindness, and perhaps some of my softness. But somewhere along the way, fear had buried those qualities beneath debt and shame. As evening approached, I carried 2 glasses of lemonade outside. We sat together on the porch, just like we used to. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Michael finally said, I met with a financial counselor. I looked at him. A small thing, yet not small at all. Really? He nodded. I should have done it years ago. His voice carried no excuses. Only truth. That mattered, because healing begins where excuses end. What did they say? A tired smile crossed his face. That I've spent most of my life borrowing from tomorrow. Borrowing from tomorrow. The phrase struck me deeply, because isn't that what so many people do? We borrow time, borrow money, borrow emotional energy, and eventually, tomorrow arrives asking for payment. Michael stared at his hands. I kept thinking one good investment would fix everything. His voice cracked. But I just kept digging deeper. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it would all be okay. That instinct never leaves mothers. But I remembered Robert's letter. Help when help creates growth, not dependency. Growth, so instead, I simply listened. Sometimes listening is the kindest form of love. Then Michael surprised me. I owe you an apology. I remained silent. Not because I didn't want to hear it, because some words deserve room to breathe. He swallowed hard. When Dad died, I promised myself I'd take care of you. My chest tightened. I know. But somewhere along the way, his voice faltered. I started seeing problems instead of people. Those words nearly broke me, because they were true. Debt had turned his mother into an asset, a house into a solution, family into numbers, and numbers never love us back. Tears filled his eyes. I'm ashamed. I reached over and placed my hand on his. Old hands, young hands, still family. Shame can teach us, I said softly, but only if we let it. He nodded quietly. For the first time in many years, my son looked like a student again, willing to learn. The next day, Emma came over after school. As usual, she dropped her backpack by the kitchen table and immediately reached for the cookie jar. Teenagers may grow taller, but some habits remain wonderfully unchanged. How's school? I asked. She shrugged. Better. Better. Not perfect. Just better. At our age, we learn to appreciate better. She sat beside me while I prepared dinner. Then she asked quietly, Grandma? Yes? Mom moved into Aunt Claire's guest room. My heart sank. Susan's daughter Claire lived across town. So it had happened. Jennifer had left. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. I carefully set down the knife I was using. When did this happen? 3 days ago. 3 days. Michael never told me. Perhaps he was embarrassed, or perhaps some pain is too fresh to name. Emma looked down. They've been fighting a lot. Of course they had. Debt doesn't disappear when truth appears. Sometimes truth makes everything harder before it makes anything better, Shamise. Are you okay? I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. I miss when we were happy. Oh, sweetheart, don't we all? I pulled her into a hug. She rested her head against my shoulder exactly as she had when she was 5 years old. Some parts of love remain unchanged. I know, I whispered. That night after Emma left, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, because I had changed. Weeks earlier, fear had lived here. Now something else lived here. Perspective. I had spent so much of my life believing a mother's job was to prevent pain. But perhaps that isn't always true. Sometimes a mother's job is to stand nearby while her children learn from pain. Not abandon them, not rescue them, simply remain, steady, present, loving, like an oak tree. The following Saturday, Michael arrived carrying groceries. Again, no requests, no paperwork, just groceries. I watched him place them on the kitchen counter. Milk, bread, fruit, things Robert used to bring home. Mom, he said quietly. Yes? He hesitated, then finally asked, Do you think Mom would have forgiven me? Mom. For a moment, I realized he meant me. Then I understood. He meant Robert, his father. The question lingered between us. I looked toward Robert's photograph above the fireplace. Beloved husband, beloved father, a good man, an imperfect man, like all of us. I smiled sadly. Your father believed people are more than their worst mistakes. Michael's eyes filled immediately, because deep down, he already knew the answer. Not easy forgiveness, not cheap forgiveness, but earned forgiveness, the kind built through change, through truth, through time. Later that evening, after Michael left, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Jennifer's name. I stared at it for several seconds, then answered. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, less polished, less certain. Madeleine? Yes, Jennifer. A long silence followed. Then she quietly asked, Can we talk? I closed my eyes, because healing rarely arrives dramatically. Sometimes it arrives as a trembling voice on the other end of a phone. And suddenly, I realized this family story wasn't ending. It was beginning again. I did not sleep much after Jennifer's phone call. Her voice stayed with me, not because it sounded manipulative, because it sounded tired, truly tired. There is a kind of exhaustion that makeup cannot hide and money cannot fix. The exhaustion of consequences, the exhaustion of becoming someone you no longer recognize. I knew that kind of exhaustion. Grief had taught it to me years ago. When Robert died, people brought casseroles and flowers. They meant well. But no one tells you that grief is mostly paperwork, insurance forms, bank accounts, death certificates, quiet evenings, empty chairs. Loneliness hidden inside ordinary days. For months after Robert passed, I barely recognized myself. Perhaps that was why I found it difficult to hate Jennifer completely. Pain changes people. Fear changes people. Sometimes for the worse. But pain can also teach. If we let it. The next afternoon, Jennifer came to my house. She arrived alone. No designer handbag, no expensive jewelry, no carefully polished smile. Just Jennifer. And for the first time in all the years I had known her, she looked human. Not perfect, Not composed. Human. When I opened the door, she stood there, nervously twisting her wedding ring. "Thank you for seeing me," she said quietly. I nodded. "Come in." The same words I had spoken to countless guests over 4 decades. But this felt different. Some conversations changed the direction of families. I had a feeling this would be one of them. We sat in the kitchen. Always the kitchen. The heart of every home. I poured tea into 2 cups. Jennifer wrapped her hands around hers without drinking. People often hold warm cups when they feel cold inside. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then, unexpectedly, she began crying. Not dramatic tears, not the kind meant to persuade. Quiet tears. Embarrassed tears. Real tears. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Simple. Yet often the hardest words in the English language. I remained silent. Apologies deserve space. She wiped her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." That caught my attention. Most people ask for forgiveness before accepting responsibility. Jennifer continued. "I was scared." There it was again. Fear. The invisible character that had been present from the beginning. Fear of debt. Fear of failure. Fear of losing status. Fear of losing everything. She looked around the kitchen, at the photographs, at the curtains I had sewn years ago, at the home she once wanted to sell. "I forgot this was your life," she whispered. "Not your house. Your life." The distinction mattered. I felt something soften inside me. Not because the pain disappeared, because truth had finally entered the room. Jennifer lowered her eyes. "My parents lost everything when I was 12. I blinked. In all these years, she had never told me that. Never once. "Everything?" I asked gently. She nodded. "Our home. Savings. Almost everything." Her voice trembled. "I still remember watching movers carry our furniture away." Suddenly, pieces began fitting together. Fear rarely appears without history. We carry old wounds into new lives, sometimes without realizing it. "I promised myself I would never be poor again," she whispered. And there it was, the real story, not greed. Fear wearing greed's clothing. A frightened little girl hiding inside an adult woman. How many lives are shaped that way? More than we realize. "But when Michael started losing money," her voice broke, "I panicked." Panic. The cousin of desperation. The mother of bad decisions. She covered her face with both hands. "I'm ashamed." The same word Michael had used. Ashamed. Perhaps healing begins when shame finally speaks aloud. I took a slow breath. "Jennifer." She looked up. "You hurt me." Fresh tears filled her eyes. "I know. You treated my home like an asset." She nodded silently. "You forgot I was family." That sentence landed hardest of all. Because it was true. Not cruel, simply true. And truth, when spoken gently, carries extraordinary power. She cried openly now. "I know." No excuses, no blame, no defense, just responsibility. That mattered, more than she realized. We sat quietly for a long time. Outside, the old oak tree swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Still standing, still rooted, still growing, just like families must. Before leaving, Jennifer surprised me. "I'm applying for a second job." I looked at her. "A second job?" She nodded. "I can't undo what I did." Her voice trembled. "But I can stop running from it." Growth. Not perfection, growth. Robert would have approved. After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long while. Forgiveness is strange. People imagine it arrives like lightning. Sudden, complete. It rarely does. More often, forgiveness arrives quietly, like dawn, slowly, a little at a time. That evening, Michael came over with Emma. We ate dinner together. No tension, no paperwork, no hidden agendas. Just dinner. Simple things become sacred after hardship. Emma laughed at one of Michael's old childhood stories. I watched them both. Father and daughter, 2 generations, one still learning, one still hoping. Perhaps that is what family truly is, a place where people are allowed to become better. After dinner, Michael stayed behind while Emma washed dishes. He looked nervous. Mom? Yes? He handed me an envelope. Inside was a payment plan, his debt restructuring agreement, financial counseling records, monthly budgets, honest numbers, no hiding, no pretending. I looked up. You're showing me everything? He nodded. No more secrets. Those words nearly brought tears to my eyes, because secrecy had built this tragedy. Perhaps honesty would build healing. I sold the boat, he said quietly. I blinked. The fishing boat. He had loved that boat. Robert bought it for him years ago. Why? He smiled sadly. Because I can't keep living like appearances matter more than peace. Robert used to say something similar. I wondered if Michael realized it. Or perhaps wisdom finally returns home when life becomes difficult enough. That night, after everyone left, I walked through my house slowly. The same house, but it felt different now, lighter. Not because problems had disappeared, because truth had entered. Truth is painful, but lies are heavier. A week later, Emma spent the weekend with me. We baked cookies, worked in the garden, watched old movies. Ordinary moments. The kind people forget to treasure until life reminds them. Sunday evening, we sat beneath the oak tree. Fireflies danced around us. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Grandpa would be happy now? I looked up at the branches above us. Robert had planted this tree when Michael was born. It had grown through every season. Storms, heat, time, family, just like us. I smiled softly. I think Grandpa always believed people could find their way home. Emma smiled. I think so too. As the evening breeze moved gently through the yard, I realized something important. The house had survived. The family had survived. Not unchanged. Nothing survives unchanged. But surviving was never the goal. Growing was. Healing was. Learning was. And for the first time in many months, hope no longer felt impossible. Because some things, when broken, do not return to what they were. They become something wiser, something stronger, something new. And as I looked at the home Robert built, still standing beneath the Charleston sky, I finally understood. Love is not proven by never falling apart. Love is proven by choosing to rebuild. Autumn arrived quietly in Charleston that year. The air turned cooler. The leaves on the old oak tree shifted from deep green to shades of gold and amber. And for the first time in a very long time, my heart no longer felt heavy every morning. Healing does not happen all at once. It happens in ordinary moments. A phone call, an apology, a repaired porch. Dinner shared without fear. Life had not become perfect, but perfection had never been the goal. Peace was. And peace, I was learning, often arrives wearing ordinary clothes. 3 months passed after the night everything changed. Michael continued meeting with his financial counselor. He picked up consulting work on weekends. Jennifer worked a second job at a local event company. Slowly, very slowly, they began paying down their debt. Not because someone rescued them, because they chose responsibility. Emma was doing better too. Her laughter had returned. Children bloom quickly when homes become honest again. One Saturday morning, she sat beside me on the porch swing, working on a school essay. What are you writing about? I asked. She smiled. Family. My heart softened. That's a big subject. She nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Daniel said families aren't perfect. Smart teacher. Emma looked up. I think families are people who keep trying. I blinked back tears out of the mouths of children. Perhaps wisdom begins there. A week later, Susan and William came to my house. We sat around the same kitchen table that had witnessed so much joy and so much pain. The four of us reviewed documents one final time. Trust agreements, property protections, estate plans, Robert's final safeguards. At last, it was time. The next move, the one nobody had seen coming. Not revenge, not punishment, legacy. I had spent weeks praying about it, thinking about it, talking to Robert in the quiet hours of the night, even though I knew he could not answer. And yet, somehow, I felt he already had. That Sunday, I invited everyone to dinner. Michael, Jennifer, Emma, Susan, William. No secrets, no hidden agendas. Just family. The dining room looked much as it always had. Candles flickered. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Emma helped set the table. Michael carved the bread. Jennifer brought dessert. Simple things. Beautiful things. The kind we overlook until life nearly takes them away. After dinner, I stood and carried a small folder into the living room. Immediately, everyone grew quiet. Michael looked nervous. Jennifer straightened in her seat. Emma simply watched. Children often sense important moments before adults do. I sat down and folded my hands. Several months ago, I began softly, I believed I was losing everything. My voice remained steady. But I wasn't. I looked toward Robert's photograph above the fireplace. Robert spent his life protecting this family. William smiled quietly. Susan nodded. And then, for the first time, I told them the truth. About the letters, the trust, the investments, the safeguards Robert had created years before his death. As I spoke, Michael's face slowly changed. Confusion, shock, disbelief. By the time I finished, tears filled his eyes. Dad did all that? I nodded. He loved us. Jennifer covered her mouth. Even Susan looked emotional. But there was one truth left to share, the most important one. I opened the folder. Inside rested the final documents. My next move, I said gently, was never about keeping people out. I looked at Emma. It was about protecting the future. I handed her a document. She blinked. Grandma? I smiled. This is your education trust. Her eyes widened. A trust? I nodded. Your grandfather and I wanted to make sure you would always have opportunities. Emma began crying immediately. Not because of money, because of love. The best gifts often carry love inside them. Then I turned to Michael. He looked terrified, as though waiting for punishment. Perhaps part of him believed he deserved it. Maybe he did, but punishment and wisdom are not always the same thing. I handed him another document. This house, I said quietly, will remain protected under a family trust. He looked confused. What does that mean? Susan answered gently. It means the property cannot be sold or used to pay personal debts. Michael lowered his head. The tears came immediately. Real tears. Not for money lost, for trust broken, for lessons learned too late. I understand, he whispered, and for the first time, I believed he truly did. Jennifer wiped her eyes. No arguments, no complaints, only acceptance. Growth had entered where fear once lived. I reached for Michael's hand, the same hand I held crossing streets when he was 5, the same hand I held at his father's funeral, the same hand I nearly lost to fear and debt. Listen to me, I said softly. He looked up. You are not your worst mistake. Fresh tears fell down his face. But neither are you free from its consequences. He nodded immediately. I know. And I believed him. That was the miracle. Not money, not trusts. Change. Real change. Outside, the evening breeze moved through the oak tree. Its branches swayed gently against the darkening sky. Robert's tree. Still standing, still growing, still rooted. Just like family. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch swing. The same swing Robert built decades earlier. Fireflies danced across the yard. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly in the distance. Peace. Real peace. Not the absence of pain, the presence of understanding. I looked up at the stars. Your plan worked, I whispered. The wind stirred gently, and somehow, I felt less alone. At 68 years old, I had learned something important. People think inheritance is money. It isn't. Money disappears. Homes age, possessions fade. But wisdom. Wisdom survives. Robert's greatest gift was never the investments, never the trust, never the millions. It was teaching us that love requires truth, that forgiveness requires accountability, and that family, when guided by honesty, can sometimes find its way back home. As for me, I still live in the house Robert built. I still drink coffee on the porch every morning. I still speak to my husband's photograph when no one is watching. Only now, I do so with peace instead of pain. Because my son once placed my name on a nursing home form, but he never saw my next move. And in the end, neither did I. Because the greatest victory was never winning, it was healing. And real family is not defined by perfection. It is defined by the willingness to repair what has been broken. If you are carrying hurt from someone you love, remember this. You can choose boundaries without abandoning compassion. You can forgive without forgetting wisdom. And no matter your age, it is never too late to reclaim your voice. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between protecting your family and protecting yourself? And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I truly love reading every message. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about family, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue these conversations together.